do what they do, how people do things around here, workplace culture, how people do things around here. And particularly it's on a day-to-day basis, and especially when times get tough, right? And you can literally walk into an organization today and sense the culture. And culture is about shared values and beliefs about what success is. For instance, in some organizations, you can tell just observing meetings that culture is, success is sucking up to your boss.
Yeah.
And you know how that, the level of trust that creates around people. And I become very passionate about culture because where I was, right, that phone call that morning, I want you to imagine how my life would have been when my boss said to me, Dom, you're losing 30% of your team today. Any questions? And this guy went stone cold silence on the other side of the phone. And all I felt was fear and anxiety and resentment. And I'm like, why the heck are you doing this to my team? What have we done to deserve this? But I just didn't have the courage to speak up. And I fully owned that conversation. Because I want you to imagine, Andy, if I, in that split second, instead of going in my head, why is this happening? Why wasn't I consulted? And that was a habit because I found myself going into that dark space for 2 years in my life. It wasn't that situation, it was the questions I kept reflecting on. But I want you to imagine in that split second, instead of going, why is this happening? I had the courage and confidence to go, Keith, I'm so grateful to you because it's only 4:30 a.m. in Singapore and you took the time out to call me and consult me about this. I'm grateful. Can you give me 2 minutes to pull the car by the side of the road and give you my undivided attention? Keith, you sitting in Singapore, seeing what you're seeing dangers, threats, and opportunities that I'm not seeing on the ground. Head down, bum up, being very task-oriented. Tell me, why are we doing this? And I would have learned if I had exercised that courage and vulnerability and the skill to ask the right questions. I would have learned that in fact, my manager was taking a very courageous decision to drive a transformation that if he had not done, 5 years later, our department would have been non-existent.
Yeah.
And now, whilst I personally had a significant, and I would say 99% of why that conversation didn't turn out that way, because if I had done that, and imagine the next question being, Keith, where do you see ourselves 3 years from now? I can't change the decision. However, I want to be clear about what the outcome is.
Wow.
And actually sought his support, right? Thanked him for his courage and sought his support for the 30% of my team, right? To support them in every possible way to find another role in the organization, to find or empower them with the skills of resilience, right? And also to help the 70% of my team who I realized had to do more, even more, to hit our targets if we were to avoid further cuts. But imagine if I had that conversation with him, how would my profile with my boss have changed, or the way he felt about me? And how much more of a leader would I have been with my team for the next 2 years, instead of going into my cave and feeling really sorry for myself, right? And so I took full ownership of it. The skills of resilience and empowerment is, I feel, something very passionate about, that we need to empower people. Many of the organizational cultures that I've come to today, much of the culture has been developed through success is not making mistakes.
Yeah.
Success is about achieving KPIs and targets. Success is not stuffing up. Success is being in the good books of your boss. That's culture. And you know what? I must also say that if I felt that in my previous company at that moment, they had a culture that in fact sought for me to speak up. encouraged for me to speak up. That split-second conversation would have been so different from my team. But they just didn't have that culture. It was very top-down, do as you're told, command, direction. At that moment, with that particular manager, in every organization, the manager drives the culture of their teams. I wouldn't say it's an organizational thing, but certainly there is a certain feel and pattern about the culture. Right up to the 1980s, the culture very much was led by what I call transactional leadership. If I need you to do more, it's carrot and stick motivation. If you stuff up, warning letters, right? You do not get a promotion. And that creates behavior of a certain kind, right? And in certain cultures, and if you do well and you achieve your targets, you get promoted. The pain and pleasure principle, right? And so right up to then, if you wanted to do even more from your staff, you had to give them more. But for me, carrot and stick motivation is very old school. It's 1980s. Today, especially in that period of 2, 3, 4, 5 years at IBM, during that restructure, we had a lot of staff taking salary decrements. Staff who having to work 5 days a week cut down to 4 days, and expected to do even more just to keep afloat.